Barii arguuf garaa nu bal'ise yaanuyi yaa waa irraanfachuuf yaanuyi yaa waa irraanfachuuf yaanuyi. Abdiidhaaf utaalchoo yergoodhaaf miliqii qaddee kutteen baaneef waayuudhaaf rasaasa allaattiidhaaf kochoo qocaadhaaf dhagacha kennaa maaltu dida jirra hunda baacha Kunar alay jira.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marartu, and I'm here representing the 2021 OSA Conferences Coordinating Committee. On behalf of the Oromo Studies Association, we are here to announce the call for papers for both the mid-year and annual OSA conferences for 2021. I am joined by Soreti Kadir, another member of the 2021 Conferences Coordinating Committee, Lelo Guluma, also a member of the 2021 Conferences Coordinating Committee, and Kulani Jalata, a member currently of the OSA Board of Directors, and of course, former OSA president from 2018 to 2019. Ladies, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So we are here today to announce that the call for papers for the OSA 2021 mid-year and annual conferences is officially released. And we'd like to invite you to submit your papers. And you can find the full call for papers and additional information on the homepage of oromostudies.org. The mid-year conference this year will be in April, and it will be virtual. So regardless of where you are, you can submit, and you'll be able to participate virtually, even if you can't be somewhere physically. The annual conference will be either in July or August, and whether it's in person or virtual will be determined based on the evolution of the COVID-19 situation. The theme of this year's conference is recommitting to the project of decolonization in Africa, questions of economy, governance, and knowledge, which I think we can all agree is a very critical one at this point in our history. Today, we will be discussing more about the theme of this year's conference and what kind of papers we're looking for in terms of submissions. So first, I'd like us to talk a little bit more about this year's conference theme. So again, it's recommitting to the project of decolonization in Africa, questions of economy, governance, and knowledge. So why was this theme chosen now? Why was this chosen this year, and what is the relevance to current events?
I can go ahead and start if everyone's okay with that. You know, that's a really important question. I will first start by saying that at this moment, Ethiopia is on fire. And for weeks now, we've seen the international media reporting on the war in Tigray, the genocide that's happening in Tigray, in which a foreign power has invaded that region. What is less reported is, and what we are all well aware of right now, is the ongoing military occupation and war taking place in zones across Oromia. And we know that according to the Oromia support group, they have documented over 1,340 killings of civilians by government forces since October 2018. And if you haven't read that report, I strongly encourage you to do so. You can go to oromiasupport.org. There's over an estimated over 50,000 Oromo political prisoners right now. And there is an ongoing hunger strike by prominent Oromo political leaders. And today is day 25. They are striking the release, their release and the release of all prisoners and other demands, including freedom to organize. And many of these strikers, their health conditions are deteriorating severely at this moment. And you know, what's really telling about the state of affairs in Ethiopia right now is that when OSA organized a conference in Finfinne about 2 years ago now, nearly 2 years ago, and it was the first time for OSA to return or to go and host a conference in the country in over 30 years of its existence. And it was a conference that had so much promise about reforming and seeing a democratic transition. What's really telling is the people that helped organize that conference, including people like Yaso Kababa and Lami Benya and many more. They are currently political prisoners right now. I just wanted to share that brief example just to show how far things have changed in Ethiopia since 2018. And you know, we also know that there are unspeakable atrocities being committed in other regions too, like Benishangul Gumuz. And so I could go on, but my point is, like I said, Ethiopia is on fire. I do think it's reached a point of no return when it comes to instability and insecurity and war under the current status quo. And democracy has obviously become a failed promise at this point. So anyone who is interested in achieving peace, democracy, and security in the region now must step back and reassess and reframe and ask why. Why has the project of Ethiopia failed? And ultimately, what processes, what structural changes are needed to achieve peace and democracy and security in the region? And really the conference theme in OSA, that is the objective of OSA this year. That's the work that OSA is trying to do with the mid-year and annual conference. You know, OSA has been, historically, OSA has been doing work that has been lacking in scholarly research regarding that region. And it's historically been deconstructing false historical narratives about Ethiopia and about the Oromo people and about other indigenous peoples. But what this conference is doing is it is shifting the discourse and shining the light on decolonization as a framing solution for the crisis in the Ethiopian empire. And in order to do that, it is connecting with other decolonization efforts across the continent. And that's why the theme is referencing the continent. And so OSA is doing an amazing project this year in providing a platform to share and learn about other decolonization projects. And I'll just leave it at that and let others share.
Sorry to.
Yeah, that was bound to happen at some point. You guys can hear me, right? Okay. I was saying, yeah, really, really thoroughly explain Kalani, and to go off what you're saying, when we think about decolonization, particularly or like broadly in Africa, you know, it's something that happened in a certain era. It's something that began and ended in many imaginations, academic and otherwise. Like everyone has kind of gone through the process of decolonization, and now we're engaging other political processes. And what makes it really difficult for us to present the case of Oromia as one that needs to think about and really thoroughly engage decolonization as a means of addressing human rights abuses is the fact that we're only starting to push the narrative that Ethiopia itself is a colony, and it's an enduring colony, and it's the manifestation, the continued manifestation of colonization and empire that is causing what Kalani defined as military occupation in across Oromia, the human rights abuses, you know, of just horrific extent. And so focusing in on, I guess, casing this context, helping us understand, first of all, how it is that we are living in the context of a colony, how did that occur, and how to untangle ourselves from that is really important, because Oromia's primary questions of self-determination come back to trying to remove itself from the grip of empire and colonization. And that, you know, whether we call it that or not, it is the process of decolonization. But I think that it's more vital now than ever that we are very particular about the fact that we define our struggle as one that is trying to come apart from the colonial process and, you know, create something new. So yeah, shifting the discourse, coming or presenting narrative to communities outside of the Oromo community that might not understand breadth of the Oromo struggle, but also for ourselves, giving us better language to define our oppression, and then better language to define our liberation. And I think that the most relevant language to understanding our liberation moving forward is that if regime after regime we are experiencing the same or even increased levels of human rights abuses, increased levels of subjugation and just suppression of our rights to self-determination, then the root cause must be something more than just one government or one leader. And what we know that root cause to be is that we're living under the grips of an empire, and so we need to talk about how and what processes are necessary for us to come apart from that.
Thank you both. You're absolutely right. I think now more than ever, this conference theme is extremely pertinent and timely. So thank you to OSA for that. I want to talk a little bit more about the focus on self-determination and the relationship with the economic and political aspects of what's happening in Oromia. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I can start. I think that at the heart of decolonization is really the question of what structures exist, what like colonial structures exist that are exploiting indigenous people's land and resources. And then the second part of that question is, how can those indigenous nations authentically achieve political and self-determination? So that's how self-determination, I think, ties into decolonization. I think it's sort of the opposite. I think, you know, the very opposite of being a colonial subject in which you're not in control of your own land and your own resources and labor. The opposite of that is being a person that belongs to a nation that has self-determination. belong to a nation in which there is self-governance, in which the nation is led by the people and for the people. And I think when you look at Ethiopia, that and since its creation in the late 19th century, that has never been a reality for the Oromo and for any conquered peoples in that empire. And so, you know, OSA has done a lot of work in the literature and research in explaining Ethiopia's colonial history. And I think that it's been widely misunderstood by other, like other groups within the African continent who have undergone, or still sort of undergoing decolonization against neocolonialism. And so I think this topic of decolonization and focusing on how to achieve self-determination really does link oppressed peoples across the continent with the Oromo people. So, in a nutshell, I just think self-determination is just quite the opposite of achieving self-determination is the opposite of being a colonial subject.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sorry, Tia, are you going to add something or?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think that was,
Okay.
yeah, well said.
Yeah, so Kulani, you mentioned specifically other oppressed peoples across Africa. Why specifically are scholars from other parts of Africa invited to participate in this year's conferences?
I can start on this question. I think a lot of African peoples in the eastern region and also beyond are still quite far from understanding the colonial conditions of Ethiopia. I think it's still quite widely accepted Ethiopia was the only country on the continent that was never colonized. And so recognizing that there are peoples within and nations within the infrastructure of Ethiopia today that have a colonial experience and that never underwent, we're always trying, we're always engaging efforts of resistance, but never were able to remove the empire, the colony from their lands and from administering them as peoples. I think this is something that's not well understood by other African peoples. And I really feel like the most meaningful solidarity, if we can get on the same page about this story with other African nations, the most meaningful solidarity could really come from our African comrades, African peoples, both in the region and beyond. I think it's so telling. We're the largest indigenous nation in the east of Africa. Our language is the fourth most widely spoken on the continent, and very little is known about the fact that we're engaging one of the most aggressive and consistent struggles against empire till this day. And there are neocolonialism is blossoming across Ethiopia, absolutely, but we're still also struggling with like the grit, the root, the beginning of the colonial effort, as a lot of people also are across the continent. So I think, for me, that solidarity has the potential to be extremely powerful in political efforts, economic efforts, and so getting us recognized or just, again, sharing story amongst other Africans feels like something very important to do at this time.
One thing I'll add to that point is understanding that there is other groups outside of Oromia that are going through this process of decolonization. I think it's important to call other Africans in because there's a lot of shared experience, learned experience, and things we can learn from one another along the process of decolonization.
Absolutely, great points. I think one last question I have for you all about this theme: what do you see as the role of art and culture in terms of building consensus for national self-determination?
Sorry, I think you cut out a little bit for me, Mero. What was the question?
Thanks. What do you see as the role of arts and culture in building a consensus for national self-determination?
I mean, I think that's like a really critical question. Like, there's a lot to be said about the importance of music and art. If you just look across the world, like it's a universal like tool that's used by all people to express, but also particularly oppressed peoples. And so in the context of Oromia, our artists have been sort of like really pivotal in bringing and sort of being able to effectively express grievances and injustices in very beautiful forms of art. And because of that, because of the power in that, you can see through history, Oromo artists have been targeted. Of course, most recently, Hachalu Hundessa, his assassination is the most recent example. And you have before him various artists. The most famous ones are Ebdisai Dunya and Usmayo Musa. I think that these artists, although their lives were taken and away from us and from their families and from their communities, the power of what they produced and the power of music and art will never go away, especially in communities in which it's a vehicle of self-empowerment, of cultural expression. And so it's very much intertwined with the struggle of seeking self-determination because of that, because of the way it expresses the needs and the wants of people.
Yeah, this question really excites me as well. I feel like there's, even looking at the history of our armed struggle and even up until now, there's a reason why on par, with learning other aspects of armed struggle, there are people, if you have a talent for singing or writing music, you're encouraged, even in that context, to go and do that because it's seen as such an essential part of keeping the motivation and keeping the spirit of resistance alive in people. One of the, not an effective strategy, but one of the most consistent strategies of the empire is to try and strip us of our determination and our will and our desire and our fire and our passion to keep pursuing this agenda of self-determination. And, that's why they torture us in prisons or arrest us en masse or target you for listening to certain artists, just, to really break your spirit. And so the act of continuing to create a space for all of us who are in this struggle to recharge, to feel connected again to why we're doing this, to recount our history. A lot of Oromo music and art is archival in nature across history. And so, yeah, it has so many purposes. And then I think externally, so on that, internally, it has the effect of keeping us unified and keeping us directed towards our goal. And then externally, as Cloney was mentioning, all around the world, you see peoples who are engaged in struggles for self-determination turning to forms of art to express their struggle, to describe it, to tell it to others, to explain what it feels like to be in and amongst it. And I think there are many parallels that can be drawn between what it means to be in these struggles and to be a subjugated people and to be a people aspiring for freedom. And so if in no other way people learn about what we want and who we are, they can feel it through our art. And it's something that even if you don't understand the language, just the sheer will to keep creating that art despite the risks tells the world something. And so it plays such a huge role.
I agree and underscore everything that was said. I think it's all super important. I think I'll add that art, musical art is our oral histories. Documented art is our history and is also archival in nature. I agree as well. So I think art is incredibly important to preserve because I think it's artifacts of our self-determination. So it's extremely important.
Yeah, these are all really good points. I'm seeing a comment. Someone said genocide begins by or includes destroying someone's identity. That's why art and culture are carefully targeted, which is a very good point. Thank you for that comment. Going back a little bit, I wanted to ask you all, in the context of colonization and decolonization, which is what is a large focus of this year's theme for both the mid-year and annual conferences. So in that context of colonization and decolonization, what is the relationship between economic exploitation, which we know that has been ongoing in Oromia since the foundation of the Ethiopian Empire? So what is the relationship between that economic exploitation and cultural and political subjugation, which is also something that we talk about a lot?
I think, sorry to you.
Go ahead, Kula. No, you began speaking. Go ahead.
Okay. I think they are very much intertwined. And I think also that you can't really, like, just practically speaking, you can't really exploit a nation's resources and the people and their labor unless you control their systems of governance. And so I think, in other words, political oppression or political subjugation of a nation, it's pretty much the vehicle through which the resources and labor and land can be extracted from a people, from a nation, quickly, forcibly, and any resistance to that is typically met with brute force, violence, and imprisonment, and forms tactics to silence dissent. So it's sort of, I think they go hand in hand, basically. I mean, the point of controlling a political system, I think, and sort of silencing any dissent is for the self-enrichment of the people doing that, of the system, of the entity, of the persons who are controlling that system. And I think a really good example, just to take it from theory to practically what we've witnessed and seen, is that land grabbing by the Ethiopian government, especially in Oromia, which is very pervasive, and especially the land surrounding Finfinne. And we all know, actually, that the issue of land grabbing, like the Addis Master Plan, was really what sparked the round of Oromo protests from 2014 to 2018, which ultimately unseated the TPLF from the helm of the EPRDF. The spark was land. Of course, that is intertwined with self-governance issues of who's making decisions. So I think there's a very close relationship between economic exploitation and political oppression.
To add to that, yeah, it's the objective of dismantling cultural infrastructure is to make the economic subjugation just easier. I think, Kulani, you said that almost verbatim. It's what's the most efficient and effective way for me to take your resources? And if you're an empowered people, and often our cultural practices give us a sense of relationship to land. They help us connect our ancestry to land, and we see our future through land. It's as much as it is, about physical survival and economic survival. It's also part of cultural and even spiritual practice for a lot of indigenous peoples. And so if you are still connected to these cultural worldviews, then your will to resist is going to be a little bit too much for the oppressor to come up against. And we've seen that as well in the resistance efforts of the Oromo across Oromia against successive empires, is that when we are most connected to whether it's our language, whether it's our song, whether it's our means to gather together and empower each other, it's much more difficult for our lands to be exploited. So if the empire can first dismantle a people's sense of identity and a people's sense of dignity, then it's just that little bit easier to take what it is that they came to take. And I'm really glad that the example of the master plan was brought up as well, because it indicates one of the fears, one of the reasons that resistance was so necessary to that plan is that with economic subjugation and exploitation and just colonization also came further threat of assimilation. Those towns around Finfinne that were targeted by the Addis master plan are, they felt distinct. They felt like distinctly Oromo towns. You stepped into them, and the signage is in Afan Oromo and Kube. The Afan Oromo language is used predominantly in these towns. This is just on the outskirts of Finfinne. And so if this expansion took place, we're also going to see the assimilative effects that, it's also part of conquer and part of the tools of empire. So yeah, it goes both ways, and the relationship is almost inseparable between them.
Thank you, ladies. That's extremely well said. You're absolutely right. In most cases of blatant conquest and colonization, the resources that are cultivated by the subjugated peoples are treated as commodities to be used towards ends that are determined by the colonizer. And cultural and political subjugation is carried out to increase the efficiency of this exploitation. So when we're talking about colonization, we're talking about this creative process of dismantling and reverting that process and redirecting resources toward benefiting a person on whose land and territories they are produced. So I think that, people tuning in to this segment here have a good understanding of what this theme is all about now. And it's quite a large theme that encompasses a lot of different subtopics. So this theme has been broken down into 6 parameters or subtopics under which people can submit their research. The really critical papers at this point in creating links between the Oromo and scholarly communities elsewhere in Africa will be direct comparative studies on any of the questions listed in the call for papers. And the call for papers also breaks it down and lists we submitter. Can we give an overview for the audience of 6 different parameters? Am I getting out, or can you hear me okay?
It's a little bit choppy.
Okay. So we've been talking about the theme a little bit more in depth. Just to summarize, we are really keen on having people submit research and papers that can discuss the relationship and link between the Oromo scholarly community and other scholarly communities around Africa. So that's a key point here. And then the call for papers also breaks down the theme into 6 different parameters that people can submit papers. So I think we can give an overview of 6 different parameters, perhaps starting with you, Sorority.
Yes, I will share the first 2 subtopics. The first one is pursuing economic self-determination. So this subtopic highlights the economic dimension of governance challenges in Ethiopia, challenges that address things like the natural resource paradox in Oromia and southern nations, measured in the massive outflow of assets and disproportional benefits received into the region via these resources. So as a case study comparable to other regions of Africa, as Mara was saying, that a lot of these topics will be discussed via comparative case studies with other regions in Africa or countries in Africa. And then the second one is rethinking the nation state in Africa, which I think is so essential and timely for the conditions and the escalating conditions in Ethiopia where we're heading. I think this question of who we are as a nation, what needs to change, how will it change, and how will the people get the chance to actually inform what the nation state looks like or states look like moving forward are going to be. So this feels critical. So people are invited to submit papers that build on the commonalities of Oromo and other African experiences of imposed colonial state and the challenges in overcoming historical legacies of this colonization.
Now continue on. So the third subtopic of the OSA conference of the call for papers is about decolonizing indigenous knowledge. And so the papers that are sought under this topic should focus on the contribution of indigenous knowledge to particular forms of socioeconomic development and conflict resolution, and also that trace the role of arts and culture and social power in revitalizing indigenous values. And then the fourth topic or subtopic is about acknowledging new configurations of global power. So the papers that are sought on this topic, they should explore the sources of power among the technology giants in shaping domestic and global political life. For example, an understanding of papers that demonstrate an understanding of how a minority elite manages to wield power over massive majority populations.
All right, and I will continue on with the fifth and sixth parameters. So the fifth one is ensuring human-centered security. So exploring community-centered security approaches. So for example, rebuilding solidarities among neighboring peoples as new forms of regional security. And then the sixth and final parameter, as we've mentioned earlier, the particular issues rising in 2020 to 2021, assessing the socioeconomic impact of long-term state of emergency and the COVID pandemic in affected zones of Oromia and proposed policy solutions that improve prospects for a faster recovery.
Thank you. So, we've talked about the theme for this year's conferences. We've talked about, the different parameters that are involved in this larger theme. So now we want to let you all know the next steps. How can you submit? We're going to review a little bit more about the conferences, when they will be. So this call for papers is a joint call for papers for both the mid-year conference, which will be virtual, and it will be in April, and also for the annual conference, which will be in July or August. So it is a joint theme for both conferences. Leilo, can you tell us a little bit more about the deadline and how people can submit?
Sure. So the deadline for the mid-year conference is, the deadline for submitting a proposal is March 15th, and selected applicants will be informed by March 20th. The deadline for submitting proposals for the annual conference is May 31st, and selected applicants will be informed by June 30th. So as you said, papers and panels submitted for the midterm conference, but not selected, can be considered for the annual conference. So please don't submit the same paper for both conferences. There's more information on oromostudies.org, where you'll find a PDF for the call for papers and also detailed instructions on the homepage on how to submit.
Thank you. Yes. And if you submit for the mid-year conference and your paper is not accepted, it may potentially be considered for the annual conference, but don't initially submit to both with the same paper, as Lelo said. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what people need to send in.
Sure, yeah. So all this information, I think, is also in the call for papers, but for the individual conference papers, those interested in presenting their research papers at the mid-year and annual conferences are invited to submit a short paragraph outlining their topic and its contribution to the conference theme, supporting data and materials, methodology, and policy implications. So the selection committee will prioritize articles that have Africa-wide relevance within the 6 areas that we spoke about earlier and place papers with related topics into panels. Guideline for panel proposals. So OSA welcomes submissions for panels in which the presenters have agreed to collaborate with their presentations. Roundtable discussions on issues related to the theme are absolutely welcome. OSA does encourage broader reflection and engagement on other topics relevant to the Horn of Africa, as indicated with the theme we talked about earlier. You can submit a panel there can be a panel or a roundtable. So in a panel, it's a collection of papers presented on a similar theme, organized by a chair and often presented with the review of a discussant. So to submit a panel proposal, you'll need to include the titles of the presentation, the bio of the researcher, summary and abstract, and also identify a chair and discussant if desired. And then for a roundtable, it's a group of experts on a topic who offer their analysis in a shared platform, usually presided over by a moderator. For the roundtable, OSA invites submission of a 1-page summary of the group proposal, which provides the name of the moderator, the importance and relevance of the topic, names and details of the speakers, and also including their bios. You don't have to remember any of this information. Just to reiterate, all of this information is also in the call for papers.
Thank you. As Lelo said, please go to oromostudies.org. On the homepage, if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll find a PDF for the call of papers link there. All of the information that we have discussed, including all of the instructions for submission and the deadlines, the email address, all of that that Lelo has mentioned is listed in that PDF, easily for you to download. As we are here, I wanted to also mention, which I think a few people have mentioned in the comments as well, that there is an ongoing Twitter campaign right now, a massive Twitter campaign from different groups of youth and other activists happening right now related to starving for justice and Oromo protests. So please join in to that campaign. Someone asked, what is the theme? So in case you missed it, we have been here discussing the call for papers, which has just been released for the OSA 2021 mid-year and annual conferences. And the theme is recommitting to the project of decolonization in Africa, questions of economy, governance, and knowledge. Ladies, before we wrap up, do you have anything that you would like to add?
I mean, I'll just add one last note, just one last thing. I think, I'm not sure if I'm frozen or if, can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So just in case there may be the perception that there's something disjointed about doing an academic conference at the same time, the country's on fire and there's, human rights abuses that are not being addressed. I want people to really think about how this platform and this conference is about thinking about solutions and ideas, and connecting with other peoples who have experienced similar struggles. And it is really important to do that now while continuing the advocacy that's going on regarding the political prisoners and the ongoing wars. I think that you can't just do advocacy without coming up and thinking about solutions and also building alliances and support with other groups. That's my last note. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kuleni. Excellent point. Does anyone else have anything to add before we wrap up? Okay. On behalf of OSA, the Oromo Studies Association, I would like to thank all of you for joining us on this panel and everyone in the audience for listening in. Again, all of this information is available at oromostudies.org. Thank you all for tuning in, and we look forward to reviewing your submissions. Thank you.